Thank you guys for having me. This is quite an honor. Today I'm going to be talking about storytelling, trauma, and identity. Those are three big topics, but I wanted to start out with something a little bit more simple. My family. This is my family. My father's name is Anise Vance. He's African American. He's black. He grew up in Hartford, Connecticut. There's my sister. She looks really young. She's actually 25. She's older than me, and she's in law school right now. There's me with a Jerry curl thing going on. And there's my mother. Her name's Anise Vance. She appears white to many people, but she's actually natively Iranian. She came over to the U.S. before the Iranian Revolution. We bounced around a lot when I was a kid. I was born in Cote d'Ivoire, the Ivory Coast, which is in West Africa, moved to Kenya, then Botswana, and then finally graduated high school in Egypt. Now, being mixed race and moving around all the time was confusing. To me, to everyone who saw our family, to our family itself. My mom used to go into grocery stores with me and my sister, and people would come up to her and be like, "Thank you so much for adopting these kids." When I was in elementary school, I used to come home, and my grandmother on my mother's side lived with us for a while. I used to come home, and I used to look her dead in the eye, and I used to say, "Grandma, you know I'm black, right?" And when I was in Egypt, every Egyptian I saw thought I was Egyptian. So they'd stop me on the street and they'd ask me for directions, and my Arabic was halting at best. So there was a point in the conversation where I could no longer respond, and people would literally yell at me. You know, they'd be like, "You're so stupid. How can you be so rude?" And all this other stuff. So it was a very confused upbringing. And when I came to Dartmouth, it's not like any of this stuff went away. In fact, actually, just a week ago, I was walking around Ockham Pond, just trying to clear my head, and there was an alum who was walking his dog. He was a 76 or 79, I forget. And we got to talking. And then he asked me, "Where are you from?" And, you know, I was just going to give him the easy answer. I was like, "Most of my family lives in Boston. That's where I call home." And he said, No. With a name like Anise, where are you really from, right? So all these issues of identity kept on playing out in my life, even at Dartmouth. So I got intellectually obsessed with issues of identity and place, what creates us, and how other people view us. So when it came time to write a thesis for junior year, most people have a million things going through their head. I just wanted to do one thing. I wanted to talk about identity, and I wanted to talk about it in a personal way. So I went back to the place that my dad is originally from, Hartford, Connecticut, particularly North Hartford, Connecticut, which is predominantly black now, about 90 to 95% black. So I went there with the intention of just talking to people. I was doing historical and structural research as well, but really the crux of it was these interviews with community members. Talk to them about the community, what it meant to be from there, what it meant to be black in North Hartford. And the three things that kept on coming up over and over and over again were narratives of violence, narratives of confinement, and narratives of migrancy. And what I mean by these things are several things. By violence, I mean not only physical violence, in which people underwent, fights, domestic abuse, or whatever it is, but also psychological violence. There was what one interviewee described a culture of ranking, where people would sit out on the corner for hours at a time, and all that would happen was that you'd trade insults over and over and over again to try to prove who was best, to try to rank yourselves, right? That's psychological abuse, psychological violence. By confinement, I mean not only geographic confinement. Most people don't actually realize the extent of the geographic confinement in the United States as a whole. There were, during the 50s and 60s, covenants, literal covenants in suburbia that said you can't sell to a black person. There were incidents of violence if a black person moved in next to you. There was all this kind of stuff that made sure certain people lived in certain areas. Now, confinement can also refer to imprisonment, which in North Hartford, as I'll talk about a little bit later, is sky high for black men in particular. The third thing is migrancy, and these aren't only memories of migrancy from the south to the north in terms of great migration. This is intra-community migrancy, something that one of the interviewees called invisible homelessness, where, say, I'm living with my parents split, so I go to live with my dad, and wherever he's now living, my dad maybe hits me, so I go to live with a friend. My friend, all of a sudden, they can't make the rent, so they get evicted, it just keeps on going on and going on and going on, and so you have this homelessness with a roof, but a homelessness nonetheless. So when I was trying to deal with this stuff, there were two things that popped out to me. First were that these stories were intergenerational. It wasn't just the 20-year-olds who were telling me this. It wasn't just the 50-year-olds. It wasn't just the 80-year-olds. It was everybody who was saying this. The second thing was that this was all pervasive. That regardless of whether you had actually lived through some of this stuff or not, you had to live your life in reference to it, because it was there all the time. And so I struggled to come up with an idea that actually encapsulated what was going on. And the great thing about doing research as an undergraduate or a graduate is that you're not out there by yourself. So I was, emailing and talking to my advisor, Professor Richard Wright, and I was coming up with all these crazy theories, bodily consciousness, stuff like that just sounded ridiculous. And he tells me, he's like, Anise, you need to look at an idea called post-memory. Now, post-memory was originally developed by Professor Marion Hirsch, who actually used to work at Dartmouth a little while ago. And it was applied to Holocaust studies. What it describes is the relationship of a second or third generation to a first generation that has experienced some kind of a trauma. And it argues that a lot of identity, a lot of how we constitute ourselves, comes from those traumatic experiences if we come from one of those communities. Now let me give you a concrete example of what that means in North Hartford. And since I only have about 8 minutes, I thought I'd tackle the really simple stuff, like slavery. So this is an actual conversation I had with, with one of my interviewees. His name's not Tony. I didn't put his name up there to protect his identity and all that. So he says, when you hear the word slave, what image pops up in your head? And I said, black. And he says, see what I mean? They have so effectively told us how to think and what to think. The first image of slave that pops up in our mind is ourselves, right? Now, we could spend hours on this one quote, disentangling all the different things that he means by that, but there are 3 things that he particularly pointed to. He said, 1, out of all the histories of slavery in the world, and even in the United States, we choose to only look at black slaves. And that's a highlighting element of post-memory, of the way we creatively imagine our own history. The second thing that he pointed to was that we make slaves and blacks synonymous. It wasn't that a black person was a slave, that a black person is a slave, right? And that, again, is post-memory. It's imaginatively creating what it is we essentially are. The third thing, and this is where post-memory gets so troubling, the third thing that he pointed to was that the process continues, right? So if you have imaginally invested in a history and in a group, then you have to reaffirm that history in order to be who you are, right? So in North Hartford, in particular reference to imprisonment, one of the guys I talked to said imprisonment was a kind of rite of passage for young black men. It was what made them legitimate and credible in certain communities in the area, right? Now that's deep, one, and that's also incredibly destructive, right? So the question that we then come to is it possible, and how do we interrupt post-memory? Oh, I love that graphic. There we go. And to answer that, I went to the community itself. And there's a school in the community called Jamoki Academy. It's an elementary and middle school. It's scoring higher than all of the suburban schools, which is incredible for an area that is so impoverished, an area that has experienced so much trauma and suppression. So I went there and I talked to them about, what it is, what are you guys doing? How are you guys creating success in this school and in this area? And the principal told me, okay, we have all the structures, we have all the tools, we have great teachers and all this, but we also surround them with continual positive encouragement. They've done all kinds of stuff. They have made up awards to give to students who are doing poorly so the students feel a sense of validation, invited the student's parent in so the parent has a positive experience in the school, and all of a sudden this turns things around. This is the first time in anyone's memory that somehow school is a positive thing. That somehow you're telling these kids that they can actually, and they should, succeed. Not despite of their identity, but based on their identity. When I went to the school, it was incredible. I looked around every corner, and there was Barack Obama everywhere. I've never seen so much Obama. Pictures of him up on all the walls. And, I'm not that political of a person, but I noticed this. And so I asked the principal, did you guys put these up yourselves as positive encouragement? And he was like, no, actually, the kids put these up, right? And I was thinking, this is incredible. They don't know anything about policy. They don't know anything about, any of the kind of political shenanigans that go on, but all they see is a narrative that disputes what they have seen in their own community, and they latch on to it. They are empowered to then refute a story and create their own. Now, if that isn't empowerment, I really don't know what is. Thank you all very much.